pundit class, those self-styled experts who dominate the airwaves, are nothing more than mouthpieces for the status quo. Their debates are performative, their insights shallow, their conclusions foregone. They are paid handsomely to maintain the illusion of discourse, to provide the appearance of critical examination while ensuring that nothing fundamentally changes. They speak in sound bites and cliches, reducing complex issues to simplistic binaries that fit neatly into the existing narrative. Their primary role is to reassure the public that everything is under control, that the system is functioning as it should, and that any problems can be resolved within the confines of the existing order. Social media, often touted as the democratizing force that would liberate information from the clutches of traditional gatekeepers, has instead become a new kind of prison. The algorithms that govern these platforms are designed to maximize engagement, and they do so by amplifying the most extreme and polarizing content. Echo chambers proliferate, where users are fed a steady stream of information that reinforces their existing beliefs and prejudices. The result is a society that is more divided, more distrustful, and more susceptible to manipulation than ever before. In this digital age, misinformation spreads like wildfire, and the line between truth and falsehood is increasingly blurred. The very tools that should empower us to be more informed are being used to sow confusion and doubt. Fake news, deepfakes, and conspiracy theories proliferate, eroding the foundation of shared reality upon which any functional society must be built. The media, far from combating this trend, often exacerbates it by giving platforms to charlatans and demagogues who traffic in lies and deceit. One of the most notorious examples is the Iraq War. In the lead-up to the 2003 invasion, major news outlets in the United States and the United Kingdom parroted the false claims of weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, possessed by Saddam Hussein. These assertions, propagated by government officials and amplified by the media, were based on dubious intelligence and outright fabrications. The New York Times, for instance, published stories by Judith Miller that were later found to be based on unreliable sources. The media's failure to critically examine the evidence and its eagerness to support the war narrative contributed to a conflict that resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands and destabilized an entire region. The eventual admission that no WMDs were found did little to absolve the media of its role in facilitating a catastrophic war. Another glaring example is the financial crisis of 2008. For years leading up to the collapse, financial media outlets, including CNBC and the Wall Street Journal, largely failed to scrutinize the practices of major banks and mortgage lenders. Instead, they celebrated the booming housing market and the complex financial instruments that were driving it. When the bubble burst, it became clear that these outlets had ignored warning signs and had been complicit in promoting the very institutions that brought the global economy to its knees. The subsequent coverage often framed the crisis as an unforeseeable disaster, conveniently omitting the media's own negligence and the systemic corruption they failed to expose. The relationship between the media and the pharmaceutical industry presents another troubling example. The opioid crisis, which has claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands in the United States alone, was exacerbated by the media's failure to adequately investigate and report on the aggressive marketing tactics of companies like Purdue Pharma. For years, these companies promoted opioids as safe and effective for chronic pain, downplaying the risks of addiction. Media outlets, benefiting from significant advertising revenue from these companies, often turned a blind eye to the emerging epidemic. It was only after the crisis reached devastating proportions that investigative journalism began to uncover the extent of the industry's deception and the regulatory failures that allowed it. Climate change, arguably the most critical issue facing humanity, has also been subject to media manipulation and misinformation. For decades, fossil fuel companies have funded think tanks and pseudo-scientific research to cast doubt on the overwhelming consensus about human-induced climate change. Media outlets, in a misguided attempt to present balanced reporting, often gave equal weight to these contrarian voices, creating a false equivalence that has stalled meaningful action. The infamous ClimateGate scandal, where hackers released emails from climate scientists out of context, was sensationalized by the media, further undermining public trust in climate science. This skewed coverage has had dire consequences, delaying the implementation of policies needed to address the growing climate crisis. The ongoing saga of whistleblowers like Edward Snowden and Julian Assange further illustrates the media's role in perpetuating narratives that serve state interests. Snowden's revelations about the NSA's mass surveillance programs should have sparked widespread outrage and a re-evaluation of government overreach. While there was initial coverage, the media quickly shifted focus to Snowden's personal life and the circumstances of his asylum, rather than the substantive issues of privacy and civil liberties. Similarly, Julian Assange and WikiLeaks exposed war crimes and diplomatic deceit, but media coverage often fixated on Assange's legal battles and character assassination, diverting attention from the critical content of the leaks. More recently, the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the media's propensity for both misinformation and omission. In the early stages, mixed messaging and conflicting reports contributed to public confusion and mistrust. Sensationalist headlines about treatments and the origins of the virus overshadowed essential information about safety measures and vaccine efficacy. Social media platforms, acting as modern extensions of the media machine, amplified conspiracy theories and unverified claims, further muddying the waters. The failure to provide consistent, clear, and accurate information undoubtedly exacerbated the public health crisis. The media landscape is dominated by a handful of powerful moguls whose empires profit immensely from the spread of misinformation. These figures wield tremendous influence, shaping public opinion and policy to suit their interests while amassing vast fortunes. Their actions and the operations of their media conglomerates provide stark examples of how misinformation can be monetized. Rupert Murdoch, the Australian-born media magnate, is perhaps the most notorious figure in this regard. His News Corporation empire, which includes Fox News, the Wall Street Journal, the Times of London, and numerous other outlets, has been a central force in the dissemination of sensationalist and often misleading information. Fox News, in particular, has been criticized for its role in spreading conspiracy theories and partisan misinformation. The network's coverage of issues like climate change, healthcare, and the COVID-19 pandemic has frequently prioritized sensationalism and ideological slant over factual accuracy. Murdoch's media outlets have been instrumental in shaping right-wing populist movements in the United States and abroad, creating a feedback loop of misinformation that drives viewership and profits while polarizing societies. Another key figure is Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon and owner of the Washington Post. While the Washington Post is often praised for its investigative journalism, Bezos's ownership raises concerns about potential conflicts of interest and the influence of corporate power on editorial decisions. Critics argue that the newspaper's coverage of issues related to Amazon, such as labor practices and antitrust scrutiny, might be tempered by its owner's interests. The intertwining of media ownership with other vast business interests exemplifies how the pursuit of profit can shape media narratives and potentially suppress critical stories. Carlos Slim, the Mexican business magnate, holds significant influence over media in Latin America through his stakes in the New York Times and various Mexican media companies. Slim's control over telecommunications and media has raised concerns about monopolistic practices and the concentration of media power. The potential for such influence to shape media coverage in ways that favor his business interests is a clear example of how media moguls can profit from maintaining a certain narrative or withholding critical information. Silvio Berlusconi, the former Prime Minister of Italy, provides another example of a media mogul who has profited from controlling the narrative. Berlusconi's Mediaset, Italy's largest commercial broadcaster, has been a powerful tool in his political and business endeavors. His control over a significant portion of Italy's media landscape allowed him to shape public opinion, promote his political agenda, and stifle dissent. The intertwining of his media empire with his political career exemplifies the dangerous nexus of media ownership and political power, where misinformation and biased reporting can be used to maintain control and suppress opposition. Mark Zuckerberg, co-founder and CEO of Facebook, is also deeply implicated in the monetization of misinformation. Facebook, now Meta, has become one of the world's most influential media platforms with billions of users worldwide. The platform's algorithmic focus on engagement has often prioritized sensational and divisive content, leading to the widespread dissemination of misinformation. From the spread of fake news during elections to the proliferation of conspiracy theories about vaccines and COVID-19, Facebook's role in amplifying harmful content has generated significant profit for the company while causing societal harm. Despite repeated calls for reform, the company's efforts to address these issues have often been seen as insufficient, prioritizing growth and profit over the integrity of information. Robert Maxwell, the late British media proprietor, provides a historical example of how media moguls can exploit their power for personal gain. Maxwell's ownership of the Mirror Group newspapers was marred by financial scandals and accusations of misusing pension funds to prop up his failing businesses. His manipulation of media assets to secure loans and influence public opinion illustrates the corrupting influence of media power when wielded by unscrupulous individuals. These moguls exemplify how media control can be used to propagate misinformation, influence public opinion, and protect business interests. Their empires thrive on the dissemination of sensational and often misleading information, creating a media environment where profit trumps truth. As consumers of media, it is crucial to be aware of these dynamics and to critically evaluate the sources of our information. Only by supporting independent journalism and holding media moguls accountable can we hope to combat the pervasive influence of misinformation and restore integrity to the media landscape. While right-wing media moguls and their outlets often dominate discussions about misinformation and media manipulation, it is essential to recognize that left-wing media moguls and news sources are not immune to criticism. The influence of left-leaning media can also result in biased reporting, ideological slant, and the dissemination of misinformation, albeit often in different contexts and with different consequences. Examining these entities reveals a more comprehensive picture of the media landscape and underscores the necessity of maintaining rigorous standards of journalistic integrity across the spectrum. George Soros, the Hungarian-American financier and philanthropist, is frequently cited as a powerful figure in left-leaning media and political activism. Through his Open Society foundations, Soros has funded numerous media outlets and journalistic initiatives that promote progressive causes. While his efforts have supported important work on human rights, democracy, and social justice, critics argue that his extensive funding network can lead to a lack of diversity in viewpoints and a tendency to push a particular ideological agenda. This concentration of influence can result in media coverage that is skewed towards specific progressive narratives, potentially sidelining alternative perspectives and complex nuances. The Huffington Post, founded by Arianna Huffington and now owned by BuzzFeed, has been a prominent left-leaning news source that has faced criticism for its editorial practices. The outlet's blend of news and opinion, often presented without clear distinction, can blur the lines between factual reporting and ideological commentary. While the Huffington Post has provided a platform for diverse voices and progressive viewpoints, it has also been accused of promoting sensationalism and clickbait to drive traffic. This approach can lead to the amplification of polarized narratives and contribute to an echo chamber effect among its readership. NBC Universal, owned by Comcast, is another major player in the left-leaning media landscape. MSNBC, one of its flagship news networks, has been criticized for its partisan slant and tendency to focus heavily on narratives that align with progressive politics. The network's coverage of political events, particularly during the Trump administration, often emphasized opposition to conservative policies and figures, sometimes at the expense of balanced reporting. This focus on partisan conflict can exacerbate political polarization and limit viewers' exposure to a broader range of perspectives. Vox Media, known for its explanatory journalism and progressive stance, also illustrates the challenges faced by left-leaning media. Vox's commitment to providing context and analysis is commendable, but its coverage can sometimes reflect a strong ideological bias. Critics argue that Vox's framing of issues tends to align closely with progressive viewpoints, which can lead to selective reporting and an emphasis on narratives that support its ideological leanings. This approach, while informative, risks reinforcing confirmation biases and reducing the space for genuine debate and critical thinking. The New York Times, often regarded as a bastion of liberal media, has also faced scrutiny for its coverage and editorial decisions. While the Times is celebrated for its investigative journalism and in-depth reporting, it has been accused of allowing ideological biases to influence its news coverage. This can manifest in the selection of stories, the framing of issues, and the prioritization of certain viewpoints over others. The paper's handling of controversies, such as the coverage of the Russia investigation and the internal debates over opinion pieces, highlights the challenges of maintaining journalistic objectivity in a highly polarized environment. The Guardian, a British newspaper with a global audience, exemplifies left-leaning media that is both influential and controversial. Known for its progressive editorial stance, The Guardian has championed causes such as environmentalism, social justice, and human rights. However, its coverage has sometimes been criticized for lacking balance and for promoting a particular ideological agenda. The paper's investigative work on topics like climate change and corporate malfeasance is vital. Yet its editorial slant can occasionally overshadow its commitment to impartial reporting. These examples underscore the reality that media bias and the potential for misinformation are not confined to any one part of the political spectrum. Left-leaning media moguls and news sources, like their right-wing counterparts, can fall into the trap of prioritizing ideological conformity over journalistic rigor. The consequences include the reinforcement of echo chambers, the marginalization of dissenting voices, and the perpetuation of a polarized media environment. Ultimately, the critique of media should transcend partisan lines. The goal should be to uphold the highest standards of journalistic integrity, regardless of ideological affiliation. This involves a commitment to balanced reporting, critical examination of sources, and an openness to diverse perspectives. As consumers of media, we must remain vigilant, questioning the narratives presented to us and seeking out a wide range of viewpoints. Only by doing so can we hope to foster a more informed and engaged public capable of navigating the complexities of our modern world. The education system, once a revered institution designed to enlighten and empower, has devolved into a bureaucratic monstrosity that stifles creativity, suppresses critical thinking, and churns out compliant workers rather than informed citizens. This system, driven by outdated methods and entrenched interests, serves more to perpetuate societal inequalities than to bridge them. Its flaws are manifold, affecting every level from primary education to higher learning, each layer revealing a deeper dysfunction. From the earlier stages, the education system imposes a rigid structure that prioritizes rote memorization over meaningful learning. Children, brimming with curiosity and creativity, are funneled into an environment where conformity is valued above all else. The standardized curriculum dictated by distant policymakers leaves little room for exploration or individual interests. Teachers, burdened with administrative duties and standardized testing requirements, are often unable to nurture the unique talents of their students. Instead, they are forced to focus on teaching to the test, reducing education to a series of boxes to be ticked and metrics to be met. The emphasis on standardized testing is particularly pernicious. These tests, designed to measure academic achievement, often fail to capture the true breadth of a student's abilities or potential. They reduce complex, multifaceted individuals to mere numbers, fostering a culture of competition rather than collaboration. The pressure to perform well on these tests can be overwhelming, leading to anxiety, stress, and burnout among students. Moreover, standardized tests often reflect and reinforce existing social and economic disparities, further entrenching inequality. As students progress to higher levels of education, the problems only deepen. High schools, ostensibly preparing students for adulthood, are more concerned with maintaining order than with fostering independence or critical thought. The curriculum remains rigid, with little regard for the diverse interests and aspirations of students. Those who do not fit neatly into the prescribed mold are often left behind, their potential unrealized, and their spirits crushed. The focus on grades and college admissions creates a high-stakes environment where the intrinsic value of learning is lost. Higher education, which should be a bastion of intellectual freedom and discovery, has become a commercialized enterprise. Universities, driven by the pursuit of revenue, prioritize profit over the educational needs of their students. Tuition fees have skyrocketed, saddling graduates with crippling debt that can take decades to repay. The promise of higher education as a pathway to opportunity and upward mobility has become a cruel joke for many, as they find themselves burdened with loans and facing a job market that does not value their degrees. The corporatization of universities has also led to a devaluation of certain fields of study. Disciplines that do not promise immediate economic returns, such as the humanities and social sciences, are increasingly marginalized. The pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, the exploration of ideas that challenge and expand our understanding of the world, is discouraged. Instead, the focus is on producing graduates who can immediately contribute to the workforce, reducing education to mere vocational training. Moreover, the influence of corporate funding and interest in academia cannot be overlooked. Research agendas are often dictated by the priorities of private donors rather than by the quest for knowledge or the public good. This can lead to biased research outcomes and a lack of critical inquiry into issues that may threaten powerful interests. The integrity of academic institutions is compromised, and the public's trust in the value of higher education erodes. The systemic problems in education are further exacerbated by deeply ingrained social and economic inequities. Schools in affluent areas are well-funded and well-resourced, offering a plethora of opportunities and support for their students. In contrast, schools in poorer areas struggle with inadequate funding, dilapidated facilities, and a lack of basic resources. This disparity creates a two-tiered system where access to quality education is largely determined by socioeconomic status, perpetuating cycles of poverty and disadvantage.